Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today's episode is one I wish I had had when I was in college because we're talking about something that a lot of students are thinking about, but not always asking out loud. And that is what jobs actually exist in communications? How do you get one? And what does the future career path look like? To have that conversation today, I'm joined by James Walker. He's the Executive Vice President and General Manager at Weber Shandwick in Baltimore, Maryland. That is a global communications agency. And he leads teams at the intersection of communications, marketing, and digital, helping brands build trust, manage risk, and drive engagement across both B2B and B2C spaces. He's worked globally across markets like the US, UK, China, Brazil, and many more. And he also teaches, mentors, and even hosts his own podcast. So today we're going to break down what the communications industry actually looks like right now, where it's going, and what you should be doing to prepare. James, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little, I introduced you a little bit, but why don't you give us a little more background about your current role and what your work thus far has been like in communications?
Sure. What I always share with folks is that working communications, you wear many different hats. And in maybe a more traditional sense of PR and communications, we're meant to be in a bit of the background. If we're doing our job, people see great things, they don't necessarily see us. So the hats that I wear in terms of my role at Weber Shandwick, I lead the Baltimore office. So that is thinking about more of the account management, the financial side of managing a team of people and a series of accounts that are housed out of that office. We're a part of a larger region in Weber Shandwick South. So I also have team members and accounts that I work with in the Washington, D.C. office. And we also have connections to Atlanta as well. So that's more of your managerial, financial, operational side of the role. On the other end, I actually do the work, and that means working day in and day out with clients. My bread and butter and where I built my career was on the social and digital side of things, but I thankfully had the opportunity to start on the traditional side of PR. So that means I started out my career pitching reporters on stories, writing materials for events, managing events and conventions and meetings and all of that. So I've had a full circle career, and I'm blessed to say that I was able to see both sides of the fence before everything became digital, because now running an integrated campaign is very easy. You saw all the pieces as they matured.
I love that description. So let's start with something simple because I think this is where students get stuck sometimes. When someone says they work in communications, what does that actually mean to you?
That means that they are, in the most traditional way you could think of, concerned with helping people and organizations think about the message that they need to send, the channel that they need to use in order to do it, the purpose for that communication message to be transmitted, and thinking about what's the best way for that receiver to get the message. So it's kind of four parts there. Sender, message, means, receiver. But at its core, you're thinking about how to do that in some way, shape, or form. The way that communications is today, it spans the gamut. And even with the services that we provide and the things that my team does, some of it is pure play communications, some of it is marketing, and some of it is somewhere in between where we're doing a mix.
Yeah, I think that's a good definition. It's such a big shift from how this used to be defined. And we used to think of PR as just working with the media or you just work in social. And now, because there are so many great tools at our disposal, if you can get exposure to them in your career, it really does help you really make this ecosystem really thrive for the brands and agencies that you might be working for in the future. So, what do you think are some of the most common roles that you see on teams today that students might not think about right away as far as job opportunities?
So the big thing right now, of course, is creator and influencer. So everybody's thinking through how they can create content that mixes and starts to put the blend between maybe your traditional messaging, but also advertising in the middle. And so here, creative and influencers are bringing in their ability to rally an audience, to get people to pay attention to them, and ideally pay attention to the things that they share. So what I'm seeing now in terms of titles that maybe people aren't thinking about is creator or influencer management, where you can be the content creator or you can be the person working on behalf of a company or working at an agency on behalf of a company to actually find and identify those influencers, to vet them, to say, okay, is their content in line with what this brand is comfortable with associating themselves with? And that's where some of that risk and reputation piece can come in. And then on the other end, you can be the person who is actually brokering the deal because influencers, of course, are getting paid good amounts of money to create this content. So you may be helping to determine based on an audience what a certain price is and negotiating a bit between that influencer and the brand on what that price is, what content they create for that, what's the deliverable. And then on the final part of it, working through messaging, sorry, excuse me, not messaging, measurement, and determining did the brand get the ROI they were looking for out of that process. So I think that's probably among the newer side of things. And of course, we'll get to it early. Anything related to AI. Can you think about how you make great prompts that help facilitate easier processes or faster processes? Are you thinking about how you can use AI to create content? Are you thinking about how you can use AI to do whole decks? I think from the marketing side, we see this a lot on B2B and the startup community. They're thinking about how I can create a pitch deck completely automated with a few different inputs. So if you're thinking about the newer ends of roles, creator and influencer management, I think is becoming a bigger piece of the pie. And also anything that's AI related in terms of process and operations. How do you make it easier, faster, more cost effective?
Yeah, I think those are really good descriptions. And I think that students today are growing up in a more evolved communications landscape. So this has really opened up a lot of strategy and analyst roles that really just didn't exist before. They were kind of being done by other positions. Traditionally we would look at like a coordinator or a manager for like PR or communications. And now there really are a lot of specialties that are coming online. So I always recommend that everyone try to get exposure to as many things as you can because the communications world is very big, but also pay attention to what you're interested in and you like because there are so many roles that are evolving that can really support those interests that you might already have.
Definitely.
So you're
Well,
leading at a major global agency, and I always like to talk to people about and students about the difference between agency and in-house communications because those are really our two main career paths when it comes to communications. Can you break down for people how they can think about agency versus in-house and then also describe agency life specifically to someone who's never experienced it?
sure. So agency versus in-house, I feel like it's the tried and true dynamic in two sides of the fence. Working in agency life, you work for an organization that services a series of clients across sectors, and you are their arms and legs, your extension of their team in many ways, shape, or form. There's a lot that happens in organizations in terms of making communications and marketing come to life for a brand or a company or a nonprofit organization, say. But then there's specialty areas where you want to bring in the experts. And that is typically when you will see an agency team get tapped. So maybe a marketing team could be 5 to 10 people on the smaller scale. It could be 300, it could be 1,000. But those people have a lot that they need to do in order to make that machine work. The agency team is going to be able to come up with the creative ideas. They're going to be able to execute in special ways. They tend to be a little bit quicker on the trend and bringing that in and making sure that there's a pairing, properly pairing that with the brand. So I'm a little bit biased. I've spent the majority of my career on the agency side because of the variety, the fun, the newness that can come with that. On the other side, the in-house side, that is where you are literally holding and steering the wheel of a brand or an organization. So if you want to have real control over what is done, what's not done, an in-house role may be where you end up leading because it gives you an opportunity to steer that ship. You're going to be thinking about not only what is the right idea, what's right for my brand, how do I service and work with different teams within that organization, but you're also going to be thinking about a lot more about risk and reputation. You're going to be thinking about where certain executives should or should not show up in media outlets and digital outlets and video. You're going to think about how they show up. You're going to think about how that meshes with the organizational priorities, principles, messaging. Now, agency teams support all of that, and we do a lot of recommendations to guide it. But on the in-house side, you get to be a bit more of the decider in that process. So there's pros and cons to each. And I think from my perspective, I would love it if everybody got to start their career on the agency side, to experience it, and then go in house if that's ultimately what you want to do. I learned so much in my first 3 years of my career just because of the variety and the different clients that I had an opportunity to work with, that I had a more informed point of view than I think some of my classmates from undergrad who went directly in house. They knew what they knew from that organization And there's a benefit to both sides, but I have a little bit of a bias to say start agency. If you love it, stay. If you want to try something new, then in 2 to 3 years, try going in house.
Yep, I think that's really great advice. I always tell people that too. I think agency can really accelerate your learning, especially at the beginning of your career, because you are getting exposed to so many different industries and projects. And another way that I always like to think about agency versus in house is, of course, on the brand side, we try to be proactive, but I think agencies are generally known for being really proactive and the idea people. And then in house is very reactive and kind of implementing things and dealing with the organization at large. So I think, both can have value, but do kind of require a different skill set on each side of the house. So, what kind of person do you think thrives best in an agency environment?
So agency environments, they tend to attract, and the people who do well there are people who appreciate variety. They want to try different things. They're curious. There are also people who can very quickly determine, does this work, does this not work, and why. There are also people who want to hone their skills a little bit on selling in an idea. So there's a heavy bit of persuasion involved in that. How do you start to think through what the right idea is, but then on the other end, talking with a client, and honestly, sometimes you're giving an idea to a client and they need to bring it to their senior leadership so that they get buy-in. So you're not only thinking about what's the right idea for you, but how do you help convince senior leadership this is where your brand or this is where your organization should go. So people who are interested in that, who have a bit of curiosity, they love the variety, they can see strategy and understand it and help translate it for your day-to-day clients and their leadership, those people do really well on the agency side.
Yeah, I love that answer. And agencies are generally known for being at the forefront of communications. Where do you see the communications industry at large going over the next 3 to 5 years?
That's an interesting one because I feel like currently we're in an interesting time frame. So when I graduated from college, social media was extremely new. And to put it into context and to date myself a little bit, Facebook started in 2004. It was in college. It first started to open up to the world beyond certain colleges in 2007, 2008. So that was right around the time I graduated. None of the other platforms were really out there in any way, shape, or form. So I grew with social media. And I'll remember the time where it was probably around 2009, 2010. I remember going to sleep one night and waking up, and the next morning, everyone was a social or digital strategist. It had taken root, and you had to understand and reckon with how do you use these channels in order to communicate amongst everything else you're doing. Currently, I feel like we're in that tussle right now with AI. People have accepted that it's a part of what needs to happen, but we're still figuring out what that looks like. And so I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have some really solid definitions of what that is. I think from an agency perspective, we have team members and I'm engaged in it as well, trying to define that more for clients. How do you use it in the ways that help you advance your goals? And I think that's where we're headed. If we can think about how those efficiencies can be built in and how we can get to new, more creative ways of doing the work, then we've won. Now we'll have more headspace, we'll have more time to think through the other layers of it because the world just continues to evolve. And I think this is probably one of the biggest shifts in technology and process that we've had in about a decade.
I love that. Our career paths and timelines just line up so well in terms of what we've experienced. And that's a great analogy about how social really changed everything about communications and how we're now in this new time of AI doing the same thing. I think that's a really great parallel to draw to that. When it comes to skills, what do you think is becoming more important and what skills are becoming less important when it comes to communications?
Oh, that's a good question. So, more important, ability to quickly assess what makes sense for a brand. Because I'll say this in the context again of AI. We're also in a zone now because the content tools are getting better and the ability to get to do more interesting things are getting better. We're in a zone where it's not immediately easy for people to tell what's real and what's not real. So authenticity is something that we're talking through right now with a lot of our team members and with our clients about where that brand authenticity can come through, where organizational authenticity can come through. And then if we get down to like brass tacks, is that video you saw actually something that happened in the world, or was that something that was fabricated but just looks real? So in some ways, understanding these platforms, being able to assess this content, knowing how to use tools in ways that make sense, and figuring out where your brand or organization sits within that, that is something that I think is very important. So I say all that to say strategy and risk and reputation management are huge right now, and it's going to become more and more important. I think things that are becoming a little bit less important, and it's hard to say that because each piece matters, but I think it is becoming less important for you to be able to physically do everything yourself. I'll use a very, tricky analogy here. And you, since our career timelines match, you may, resonate with this. There was a period in time where we were in school and it was all about pencil and paper, and you had to show all your work and do all the math. And then you graduated to, I can use a calculator and it'll do it for me. I think we're now in a space where there's certain technical skills that maybe you don't need to have because you have tools that allow you to do it easily. It's important to know how, but you don't have to do it all yourself. And an example of that I will say is editing, creating content. I've created a podcast, I've created videos, and all of this. I don't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs of video editing because there's so many tools that make it simple. I think we went through this maybe a few years ago with websites. You don't need to know how to code in order to create a website or an app now. You just need to know how to strategically create one that solves a goal or a business problem and helps you achieve your goal. And that's where I think we're starting to get to with a lot of these platforms. The core things for communications and marketing are still always there. You have to be a great writer. You have to actually be able to strategically think about what you need to sell or who you need to influence for a behavior change perspective. Those things are there. We need it more than ever. We also need more people who understand risk and reputation and issues management and how that can help or hurt a brand. No point in having a great consumer based idea, not paying attention to any of the cultural or issues context around it, and now we're in a crisis mode because we didn't pay attention. So that's a lot of what I see coming. Understanding those tools in tech is very important. Knowing how to do things with that tool, that those tools in tech are important. Knowing the ins and outs and being able to do it manually, a little bit less important.
Yeah, those are great answers. I had someone ask me in an interview recently what I see as being the most important thing to know how to do in communications right now, and kind of what you're saying about recognizing risk aversion and things like that. To me, it's what is sentiment about our brand right now, and knowing in advance how you take the temperature of that by knowing what people are saying on social, by knowing what people are talking about online. It's what people are talking about online is so critically connected to what we're doing on social and what the media is talking about and what stakeholders are talking about. And so I think really thinking through some of those tools that enable us to do that and be able to take the temperature very fast of how our audience feels about a certain topic is a really critical skill that I think we can work on now, so that when things happen, you like have this toolkit to fall back on to be like, okay, I'm going to check these places really quickly to know what my audience is saying.
I think those are two great points because on the first side of it, and I didn't bring this up when we talked about roles, we have teams of people that are focusing in on social listening, but at a very deep level, and they are always working, and the tools are always working to scan what's happening in the atmosphere to understand if there's a potential for there to be a crisis moment. Who's engaged in some of those conversations? What are they saying? And getting those early signals about what's happening, we do that quite a bit for brands, and it is very helpful because it's almost as if you can avoid the crisis moment before it hits because you've got the early warning about what was happening. And then on the other side of it, there's some things that we try to do on the predictive side to map out a crisis. So we will also study crises that other, brands or organizations that have, gone through, maybe are in our client's peer set, to say, okay, if you're in the food and beverage industry, a recall today looks like this. A crisis around that recall looks like this. So when we're planning and helping them inform what types of materials do you need ready, withholding statements or other things, we're basing that off of what's actually happened in the industry, and we can try to lean in a predictive way to say, this is how you steer yourself, this is how you prepare yourself if you end up in that zone. And if you end up in that zone, this is how you navigate the crisis. It doesn't take days to do these reports and see where we need to change our messaging and do our work. We can do that within hours and in some cases minutes if we have everything set up the right way. And that's the value of a lot of the working communications that people don't see unless you're really in it with us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've spent a lot of time this semester talking about looking at our competitors and knowing what they're doing and being able to adequately look at a brand online or anywhere and kind of be able to assess what they're doing right and wrong sometimes. And I think that hits on exactly what you said, that those are things we can work on now to always be looking inside of our industries and at our peers and at other brands to help create the guidebook as things are moving along so that if your brand ever encounters something like that, you have ideas based on what you've seen work or not work from other people for sure.
Indeed.
All right. So if you were a college student right now, what would you be doing to break into the field?
Right now, I would be creating whatever I thought was interesting. I would be experimenting. And I started saying, oh, one of the more interesting roles is creator, influencer management. That's the business side of it. I think some of the most interesting work being done right now is thinking through how content comes in new ways and how content fits or doesn't fit certain organizations. There's a style to the work, and there's a way that you can be true to a brand or organization or even an executive and still move them along a spectrum to get them to a more interesting place. Funny enough, my first content creation play, I had a blog called PR Prescriptions, and I would spend time looking, reading PR Week back when it was in print,
Yeah, yep.
and going through different campaigns and saying, okay, this is interesting. Would this work for me or not work for me? How would it reach me? Well, who was really the target audience? And so, in some ways, I was really geeking out on PR. But I think if you know a zone that you're interested in, do that. If you're a sports person, I would be 100% watching everything Nike and Adidas and everybody else is doing right now and starting to think through, why are they doing that? How is this helping their brand? And how can I, if I were to be in the driver's seat or sit there among their team, what would I do? And actually do that thing. So
Yeah.
that to me is the
Well,
most interesting
think
thing you can
about,
be doing right now.
don't just consume the content or see it. Like actually think about it strategically and look at it like a marketer, the stuff that you see in your feed or you see in the real world, and try to put your marketer hat on and be like, ooh, why were they doing that? Why were they focused on this? And start asking yourselves those questions.
And those are the things that help you have your formal or informal portfolio, and it'll help you stand out for sure if you are going to apply for an internship or a full-time role. If you have things that you've put out in the world that show your expertise, that show your capability, and show that strategic mindset that you bring, it's very important to find ways to stand out, and I think that's the number one way to do it.
Yeah. What do you think stands out to you when you're hiring someone for an entry level position?
I want the same things I think that would help you make you successful. I want to see curiosity and I want to see that you have a strategic mindset so that if I give you a task, you're going to be able to think through what I asked for and maybe you can add to it, but at minimum, you understand how it connects to what the overall goal is for our client. If you can do those things, I want to definitely have you on the team. And the things that you'll learn, every agency, every organization has a way they do things and a POV. But if you have those two core pieces, you'll be able to assess each of them. And whether or not you agree with the strategy, you'll be able to understand it and you'll be able to help execute it.
Yeah, good advice. So let's switch gears and just go into a little lightning round here about different topics that students are worried about when it comes to graduating and finding a job. So the first one is, and of course is the biggest one that we've already talked a little bit about, but will AI replace jobs in communications? What do you think about that?
No, I think it's going to change what people do.
I always
It
like to say, if you think AI is going to replace us, you need to use AI more. The more I use it, the less I think it can replace me.
it
Helpful
it
tool though.
it's going to be a helpful tool, but it's going to just evolve the roles of communications professionals. It's not going to replace it. And in many ways, shapes, or forms, if you, like you said, use AI more, AI is not there yet in terms of being able to make strong recommendations. It can help identify information. It can, provide some thoughts, but that we're not at a place where it's going to match your years of experience and your real world experience navigating brands and communities and audiences and knowing how to connect the two.
Yeah, I love that. What do you think? So, social being a social media manager is is a big career path that students throw out to me. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but what jobs, you talked about influencer marketing, but what jobs exist beyond just social media manager that people interested in social could think about? being career paths?
Sure. So even within that social media manager lens, that's like a big thing I see within the community of people who do this every day. That that's a very big title and it means different things in different organizations. And some organizations want you to do everything under the sun with that. But if you really dig into it, there's the pure play manager who's going to be thinking about the day-to-day operations of the series of accounts that you might be managing and how you connect. But within that social media realm, first one I'm going to say is content creation. You can be a writer and an editor and hone that brand voice. There is the content part that's related to design. So, what graphics, what video, what makes sense to pair with this in some ways, shapes, or form? The video is carrying the entire thing. Then you have community management, which is huge. That's where we're really driving engagement for these brands. And a lot of those early warnings and signals come from the people who are engaged in community management because you see and know immediately if an idea is going to work or not work or what the detractors will say. All of that is coming from that management and engagement team. The other side that can be a pairing and it can be a part of community management or it could be separate is social listening. And there's the sense and team of people that are listening for issues in crisis. But then there's that pairing that is listening for customer care, which is a huge role for a lot of our marketing and more brand oriented clients. So in many cases, we've all done it. You have a frustrating experience with a brand, or you're looking for something that you can't find. Well, I need a tool that does this, or I'm looking for a product that does this. And we go to our platforms and we put that out there in the world, or we're engaging with people about it. It's that team of people working on community management, social listening, customer care, that kind of trifecta. They're in many ways the reasons why brands actually shift their product strategy or actually think about how do I better serve this client or how do I better get to this customer and give them the experience that they need. So those are some of the ones that I think immediately come to mind when you think about it. And then you also have influencer and creator management.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And I think for elder millennials such as ourselves, we came up at a time where we really had to do most of these jobs as a social media manager, or we're expected to know all of these things. And so I think obviously that diversity and skill set can be very valuable. But I also think it's really refreshing for students now that we are seeing more focused positions where you're not expected to do all things in one position and you're able to kind of focus in on those areas that may be a little more interesting to you. But when it comes to moving up in your career, what do you think career growth actually looks like in communications? Like you're starting in your first entry level job. Like what are some things to think about with how that pathway can shake out for you?
I think it's an interesting one, and I would have a different answer for industry versus, agency versus in house. On the agency side, you're coming in, and I'm a fan of the variety. So you want to try different things. But as you start to move through an agency trajectory, if you know you want to stay agency, you should start to think about what types of experiences you want to have and how you want to do it. I'll use a little bit of my career path as an example. So, my first job, I had an internship my senior year. I got hired full time right around a little bit before graduation. And so I rolled right into it at a small healthcare communications agency. So I worked with some pharmaceutical companies, some, health related nonprofits, and it was very traditional. That was the pitches, the press releases, some website content. I started doing some podcasting then, and I did a lot of medical meetings. So for me, I learned a lot. I learned how to do agency. I learned the ins and outs of healthcare, but ultimately I wanted to do digital. And I ended up leaving that firm to go to a bigger firm. So I went from a firm that was one office, 50 people, to a firm that had 30 offices in 18 countries and 600 people. So probably what we would call a mid-size agency. And that opened up a lot for me. So I left a traditional role and moved into a digital role. I still had the traditional skills and I still use them. But then I was growing in a digital way, doing website project management, analytics, spent a lot of time with Google Analytics as it grew, social media. I also was at a global agency and got global experience. And once I saw the opportunity, I went for it. I did an exchange program in China and I was in Beijing for a month working in their office. Came back, ended up going to Mongolia for 7 months, working with a team client side, and used that integrated experience. And then I also thought about how I built relationships in different places. So, I could go on more, but from an agency standpoint, I quickly knew I wanted to be a specialist and a strategist within digital. But in the later part of my career, kind of getting to where I am now, nearly 2 decades in, which is hard to say out loud, it's gone fast. I'm more so interested in how do I steer and help train people and shape people to be the strategist that they need to be for the accounts that we have, and playing more of a senior strategist role and counselor to clients in addition to doing the operational management. So you can have different roles and goals as your career goes on, but it's important to think about where you want to be. Because some people, I left healthcare, and there are times when I thought, oh, maybe I should go back because it was the purpose and the passion was there and it was great. Some people knew this is all I want to do. So they stayed in that trajectory. And when they were done with agency life and said, I want to try something new, they went in house. They went to a pharmaceutical company or a nonprofit, and they're leading comms and marketing now. So you have to think through where you might want to be. You can always change your plan, but have a plan.
Yeah,
Of
have a plan is good. I totally agree. I also think that diversifying your skill set's always good. So it sounds like my path has been a lot like that too, where when opportunities are presented, that you take those to learn about new areas, to expand in communications and understand things from a different perspective. Because I think as things become just bigger in communications, I think clients and brands do rely on us to know a little bit about all of the things. So I think the more exposure you can get to different areas, the better. And also be thinking about what am I interested in? What do I want to do? And then just taking opportunities as they come, because sometimes the best things in life can't be planned. And I think just keeping an open mind on all that serves everyone well too.
Definitely.
All right. So last question. You've given a lot of advice today, but what's one piece of advice that you wish more students had about working in communications?
Really, really be informed about the companies and the organizations that you want to work for and that you are working for. Understand how they make money. Understand, and this is even on a nonprofit side, because part of my career journey included a stint at the Nature Conservancy doing digital marketing for them. That meant I needed to think less about customers and clients and more so about members and fundraising and how that works. And if you understand how an organization is successful and you understand the leader's goals, you can be a more effective communication and marketing professional. So understand how it works and then think about your role in contributing to that and run. That I wish more people understood it. Don't just think about your job. You'll be more successful if you can kind of see the whole world and where you fit in it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that students today are growing up in a great time because of LinkedIn and just the treasure trove of information on there and the people that you can follow for honestly many of the brands that you might want to work for, to follow the leaders there to get a real inside look at their culture and their priorities and the things that they care about for their brand. And I think that can be such a powerful thing to have in your toolkit as well.
Indeed.
Well, James, this was incredibly helpful for students trying to figure out what's next. So thank you again so much for being here today.
All right. Thank you.